I think it's really interesting when you can chart an artist or a musician or anyone in the creative field's progress by looking at their entire body of work. When I was just starting out guitar playing, I of course was interested in being a good guitar player, but I was never really interested in being what you would call the best or a really great player. I didn't really think it was about that for me at the time. It was sort of just about finding a little bit of an identity, and because I was very, very insecure and didn't have a lot of confidence as a young teenager, I found myself and my confidence and my footing through music. You know, every time I get a little bit better at the instrument, I felt better about myself, which I'm not sure is healthy, but it helped me get through life, and it continues to help me get through life. By the time I was ready to release my first album, I was in my early 20s, and I had some people in my life that were examples of that, of how to make an album and how to go about producing something. But ultimately, those people were sort of bad influences on me, so it was reflected in my music. And what I mean by that is, when I was about 18 years old, my dad bought me a little keyboard, and I found myself very connected to trying to learn how to play piano. Of course, I never took any lessons or anything. It was just sort of me in my room trying to decide how to go about balancing guitar and piano. And I'd gotten pretty rudimentary at it. I could play chords, and I knew all my theory on guitar and music in general, so I was able to translate it pretty quickly to the instrument. By the time I was ready to make my first album, I really felt I wanted to do a guitar, piano, kind of hybrid record. But the people in my life, one specific person who I don't really want to name, said, "You should just do guitar. I don't think piano and guitar is a good balance." And he was much older than me, and it kind of, I was like, oh, okay, maybe this person's right. I didn't know, I was young. So I put the piano aside and I released my first album. Now, I didn't know how to even produce an album. This was before how you could see a million modern musicians doing it. This is in 2009, 2010. So I just went to a studio I rented nearby with my bass player at the time, and I made public display of affection in a weekend, mainly one day. And it was guitar, bass, and drums. And it was fun, it was a great experience. I think it could be, you know, much better now, but that's not the point. The point is I did it. I had a little bit of a vision and I completed it, and I did it all by myself. And it was cool, it was a nice process. Then I got the masters back on a CD, and you know, what a feeling. I also had the album mixed in an afternoon, which, you know, it's not really the way to do it, but that's all I knew at the time. I didn't have a lot of money either, so that's how it turned out. And every so often I think about that album and what it represented and what I was capable of at the time. And I know now that it had to be done that way so I could get to the point where I am now. And then, you know, I also learned a really valuable lesson. I put my first album out, and it performed poorly in terms of sales. Nobody really bought it. I had a few fans here or there that I had built up off of a YouTube channel, you know, and I just started doing YouTube videos right before that. This is 2011 now. I had some fans. That was nice. And I had now a piece of music to kind of hang my hat on. But I learned a lot from that. So then I made a second album, and I still didn't include the piano or the other instruments I was starting to get more curious about. But then I started to mess around with different styles of music. There's a song on that album called Sand Monster. There's a song on that record where I have Paul Gilbert on it. There's a bluesy one. There's a song with Guthrie Govan on it. So I was starting to branch out a little bit more. And then I was writing, while that album was being mixed and mastered, another album which was called Atomic Mind, which is where I started to really find my sound, I think, close. And that was the last record I was going to do with just guitar, bass, and drums. I wanted to start painting a picture with more colors, I guess you could say, if I was to put it that way. So this was the time when I really was bored with just guitar, because I shouldn't say bored, just maybe I had reached the writing capabilities. Because I wrote all that music with a piano. I mean, songs on that album like Atomic Mind or A Wonderful Madness, Ghost, Robot, and all that stuff. It was all on the piano. So I thought, why am I doing this on the guitar when I could be using the instrument I wrote it on? Which is what led into Remarkably Human. Remarkably Human, you know, Hyper Giant, Sick and Injured Brain, Ignore Alien Orders. All these songs were completely written at a keyboard. And this is the first time where the guitar was the last piece of the puzzle. I didn't record the guitar until the very end. And this is when I started working with an engineer. This is the first time where a new engineer. This is the first time where I traveled a long distance without anybody. I traveled to the United States to make Locked Room, but I went with a friend of mine, and it was just, I still felt like I was in a bit of a bubble. This, I was completely out of my comfort zone. And I left everything kind of behind, and I flew to another part of the world to make this record. I was very focused and singularly driven with it. It's also around the time when I started noticing I was feeling terrible all the time. I felt sick and very weak and no energy, which is when I became diabetic, just right before that. My health was starting to get a little bit compromised, which is where the name of the album came from. I started to feel very human, remarkably human. You know, when you're in your early 20s, or even your teenage years and younger, you don't feel, at least those of us who are lucky enough to not have to worry about it, you don't feel like anything bad can ever happen to you until it does, you know, until your life changes and things become a little bit more serious. Which is what happened with that album. So that album has a very special place in my mind because not only was it a big moment for my health, but it was also the first album I did where I had a guitar from Schecter with my name on it. It was the first year that I had the NJ model. It was the silver model. Made that album with that guitar. And then I went through a lot of changes because that album did a lot for my career, where I was able to start touring more and I was able to afford my own place, and I was getting really big into touring and traveling, and Schecter was really pushing me and making sure I was busy and getting out on the road and traveling. And then I went through a bad breakup, and then I ended up moving again. So much was going on. My life was kind of chaotic, which is where the title Wide Eyes in the Dark comes from. Because that means, to me it meant no matter how insane and chaotic life gets, where you don't know what's happening around you, you're kind of just trying to keep your eyes open. And you know, instead of looking around like that, you're searching. And in that time I wrote all the music for that album. You know, certain songs that kind of came out naturally, now using more tension and longer form song structure and more intensive guitar playing and harmony and working with a drummer who really isn't a rock drummer. I worked with Benny Greb, who's more of a fusion and jazz drummer. Songs like Cure Promise, Gemini, Wide Eyes in the Dark, and these pieces were kind of transitional songs for me. A little bit more piano driven, a lot of synthesizer now. Big synth started to show up on the album. A lot of Blade Runner and you know, 70s, 60s keyboard influence starts to show up, which I love. I love so much. And this is the first time I tried to write maybe all the music that sounds like it was in the same universe together. Could be a movie score, perhaps, I'm not sure. And this is when I was starting to get a little bit burnt out again with instrumental music. 2019, I went on a tour, and it was a bad experience. Not just mentally, I was also in a rough place. And then I went through a bad tour with a band that kind of made me rethink everything. I wanted to kind of give up for a while, which is when the pandemic happened, just after that. Which is very interesting because the pandemic is, to me, is light and dark. Some of the worst times when everything I had was kind of taken away from me in a way, my lifestyle that I had gotten used to. But it's also when I met my wife, so it's also the greatest time of my life. And we got married, which is wonderful. And I also wrote an album with a friend of mine. I decided after I got back from that tour, right before the pandemic started, I was needing a new direction. I was needing to be reminded why I got into music. And I had a neighbor. We kind of grew up in the same area together, but we would see each other infrequently. I'd see him sometimes driving to work, or I'd hear him outside with, he has 3 other brothers. I'd hear them playing basketball on the road. We'd be 15, 16, 17. I'd hear them playing basketball, and I was in my room practicing. I'd look out the window and go, cool. And I'd keep playing. And I always thought they were like pretty cool. They were a really close family, and I just kind of was very solitary, and I wanted to practice and get better at my instrument. To my detriment, of course. So fast forward to this time, he had moved back home, and I had to move back home just situationally. And one day, he came over with his youngest brother, and he brought a bottle of wine, and I had wine, and we were just celebrating being back home, and like, hey, it's been a long time, I haven't seen you in forever, what's going on? And we just hung out, and then he invited me over the next week to do it again. I brought some wine, he had some wine, and he was showing me some of the music he'd been working on. And I had known about the fact that he was working on music for years, because we used to kind of hang out sometimes and talk music. And I was down in the basement in his little home studio, and he was showing me some music. And he said, oh, I've been working on this one song, it's incomplete. You know, I can't figure out how to finish it. So I sat down at his piano. And by then I had written enough music and had enough time spent with piano that I could kind of plug in my sensibility to it. So I helped him finish the song, which ended up becoming a song called She Says. And then the next week I brought over my acoustic guitar and I said the same thing. I'm having a hard time figuring out this one, which became a song called Fear and Fate. And we just kind of looked at each other and we're like, we should keep doing this. We should write more music. You know, and that was kind of the birth of this project called Archival. And it completely changed the way I thought about music, because I was now in the first time, I suppose ever, I was collaborating with someone in the writing process. And I was using somebody else's enthusiasm I was using his enthusiasm as voltage for my own enthusiasm. So Ben kind of came into my life in a pretty big way. And even now, you know, just fast forward, twice a week we work on music together, even now. So that carried all the way through the pandemic. And, you know, Archival became sort of my anchor with music again, because then I started to sing. And I didn't know I could just try and do that. I never thought to do that. I was very nervous. I remember we were in the basement and I had headphones on, he had headphones on, and he said, sing the chorus with me. And then I naturally wanted to hit a harmony part, and it just, you know, all my hair stood up on my arms, and I was like, oh my God. And that was just the time where I started to kind of fall in love with music again. So I started to write more music at home, and then all of a sudden I had enough music for another album called Young Language, where it was part instrumental, part vocal. And it was very easy. That album just fell out of me. It just happened. All the melodies, they just kind of happened to work, and I started to experiment more with a blend of piano, synthesizer, acoustic guitar, singing, but keeping it a little bit more stripped down than White Eyes in the Dark. White Eyes in the Dark to me was kind of like a pizza with everything on it, every single ingredient on it. Whereas Young Language was a bit more of like a balanced meal. Both are great, but different. And then also just maturity. I mean, I've learned so much more about build an album, how to get the production in order, how to build a cast of who's playing on it, And I think that happens naturally just over time because I've done 6 albums now. Since Young Language, I've written another instrumental record, which I'll be recording soon, and finished an archival album, which will be out in the fall. And we've written a 3rd archival album, which will be out sometime next year. And I'm hoping to do this project with a couple members from a very, very, very successful band that you've probably heard of, that I was asked to join. We'll see what happens. I'm not sure, but anyway, point being, always working on something. And what I learned through all of that and what the pandemic taught me, if anything, and what happened around the beginning and the end of it, is music needs to be something that comes from a place of love. I used to think it had to be from a place of solitary, bit of struggle and using bad experiences to fuel music. Whereas now I use excitement and I use love and I use the enjoyment of getting to do this at my age, just to continue doing it. And you're hearing that now, I think, in the music. Well, after I met my wife, we got married pretty quickly after. It didn't take long because I knew what I wanted and she knew what she wanted. And as soon as we started living together, the music, I've never experienced such a prolific time in my life. I had an album written in a matter of a couple months. It was done, and it was by far the greatest thing I had ever done, because I felt like I finally found myself. So you'll see the results of that soon. Anyway, that's been the progression. It started out as a confused boy to someone who's using positivity to drive music.